Welcome to another show, everybody, of the Blue Ocean Solutions podcast, where we dive into the minds of leaders shaping the future of innovation within the sustainable energy sector. On the show, we like to highlight the ideas, the trends of successful business leaders within the renewable energy industry. I'm your host, Kreel Hutchinson, and today I'm joined by Rick Blackington, who is a senior right-of-way agent with Cathedral Land Solutions based out of Aurora, Colorado. Rick has been delivering exceptional work in providing a comprehensive suite of land and right-of-way services to the renewable, communications, public sector, electric, and oil and gas industries. Rick, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Krill. I appreciate it. Glad to be here.
So I'm really curious. I was looking forward to this conversation because I wanted to find out really more of what you guys do there and in particular your work. But let's start with kind of a broad question. What got you interested in getting into the renewable, sustainable energy industry?
Well, as probably most industries go, it's somebody that you know. And so somebody was just kind of in my ear. I'll make a long story fairly short. I have 3 children. 2 of my older children are boys. My youngest is a daughter. And my boys played football for a friend of mine who coached them. Every day after practice, he would tell my boys, listen, if you're not interested in going to college, if that's really not your route, I might have a really good idea for you. Day after day after day, he would tell my boys this. And he was into land work, though none of us knew exactly what he did. So months went by, and he's a friend of mine. And so I happened to be walking out of a game with him, and I said, hey, listen, you keep telling my boys about this fabulous idea that you have for them. Why don't you share that with their pops? So we had a brief conversation. I really got to kind of dive into what it is that he actually does. And he said, if you're interested, I'll make a phone call. So literally that's how it started. Out of the blue. It wasn't something that I studied, that I had a lot of background or connections to. It was somebody that I knew. Once that kind of unpacked, I learned that this could be a niche that I could probably have some good success in. And it has turned out that way thus far.
Great. So how long ago was that?
So it was back in May of 23.
Perfect. And then, so how did you that was the connection to the cathedral?
Yes. Well, not necessarily just Cathedral, but my friend was, I'll call him an OG. He was an original kind of guy back in the day with one of the largest renewable energy companies it's in the world. And so he came out of that industry. He has lots of connections. And so when he made a phone call for me, it was to a friend of his at Cathedral. And so that was where my connection kind of started.
Perfect. So for our audience, why don't you tell us what's the work that you do at Cathedral, and either on your side, but also the larger vision and maybe the mission that Cathedral has?
Sure. So Cathedral is basically like an agency that works for larger clients to obtain land, surface rights, subsurface rights, to do large scale projects with renewable energy or oil and gas. But the sector that I primarily work in is with renewable energy, things like wind generation, solar, hydrogen, data centers, things of that nature.
Great. And so what does your kind of day-to-day work whenever you're like strapping into office or action time? What does that look like?
It's diverse. It's very diverse in that the goal is a project, but to reach the goal, there's many steps along the way, as with any project. But in our situation, we're looking to obtain land first and foremost. You have to have land to do these large scale projects, to generate energy. So that's our first and primary focus. So day to day, I'm working with landowners, stakeholders in the project, community leaders, attorneys, all that might be involved with land and the creation of a project.
Yeah, when I was kind of reviewing what you guys were doing there, I found it interesting that you're probably having some fantastic, although challenging conversations with some of the stakeholders and trying to get everybody on the same team and, trying to move a vision forward of renewables and sustainable energy, but yet having everybody's different interest groups trying to serve. How have you found that to be?
Well, ironically, I find it to be very comfortable. I appreciate diversity, but I also feel like that's part of, I'll call it my gifting, some of my strong suit is to hear from somebody, then to hear from somebody else, and to somehow weave that together. So, hearing someone's need, hearing someone's goal, hearing someone's expectation, and then finding a common ground for all of that is something that I've found to be fairly comfortable. It doesn't always mean the outcome is, you know, the best, but I do feel like I have the ability to weave those things together and to hopefully get a win-win for everybody.
That's great. So, throughout your experience over the last few years, I'm sure you've been able to bring people through that whole dynamic process from like, a concept idea to the communications, the conversations, all the way to like project finish or up and running. Do you have anyone like that comes to mind of like a team or a group that you were able to serve in a project that really you felt was just like you knocked it out of the park for them? They were super satisfied and the project's like a win-win for everyone?
Yeah, there you have to take your wins along the way, but I'll highlight just one that comes to mind immediately. There's an older lady that I reached out to, a landowner that prior to me knowing this, she's been a fifth generation landowner. So this has been passed along, generationally to her. She's an older lady, and the conversation starts out a little rocky. When I say a little rocky, that's probably a very gross understatement. It was let's get off the phone with you as fast as possible, young man, in so many words. And so the second, though, that I just was able to settle her and to say, I hear you, I understand, I respect you, to convey just some of those sentiments, it softened her just a little bit. And within 30 seconds, we went from she was my arch enemy to very quickly all ears ready to hear what I had to say. And I have some thoughts as to why I think that happened, but the beauty is that it did happen. And so she went from wanting nothing to do with any of what I had to say to let me hear how I can be first in line to be a part of this. And so that went from something that I was able to build a friendship to even go out to her ranch multiple times to help serve her needs in that area, just to be a friend. Because in the end, I feel like I do work for a company, but I work for landowners. So once I made that connection, we became much more than just a business partnership. There was a relationship that was there. And she saw the bigger picture. It really ministered and benefited and blessed her family. And I believe it's going to continue to do that, not just for this fifth generation, but it will move to the sixth and then hopefully the seventh and so on. So when you see those things happen and it moves the needle for just everyday hardworking ranchers, farmers, those that are in that part of the world, it's very satisfying.
I'm sure. What was the end of the project looking like, or maybe it's still in process?
It
What kind of
is.
work was going to get done there?
This was for a wind project. So I'm sure you've seen, a little bit about the wind turbines and how they generate electricity. So that's what this project is for, was wind.
Perfect. So let's move into some questions around the bigger industry now. What do you think are some of the biggest shifts or trends that you're seeing right now in the renewable energy industry?
It feels like there needs to be a massive shift. I mean, there is a shift, but the reason is because everybody needs it. Everybody needs energy. So energy creation right now is obviously at a premium. We're hearing it all over, the news, all through every form of media. There is a large demand, and rightly so, because the electrification of every form of civilization right now is just it's ratcheting up, especially with AI. So there's a lot of talk in the industry of diversifying, and you'll hear certain pundits that will kind of uplift certain forms of energy creation. But my conclusion would be it's very important that all hands on deck. We need as many as possible to meet the demand in order to be sustainable.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I think the demand side is not going down, it's only accelerating with the AI technology
Absolutely.
revolutionary. And also then with even the concepts of wanting to have more security, meaning we are in control of our own destiny when it comes to power, manufacturing, and consumption. So with these trends, how do you see, business adapting for yourself to be part of that acceleration?
Well, we obviously, with what I'm doing with land, is to present that model of how there's a strong need and how there's an opportunity. So when opportunity and demand and need kind of meet, it can be a beautiful thing. So we have people that are sitting out across our country, and I'll kind of call it like they're sitting on a lottery ticket. And some of them don't even realize the asset that they hold. They've been in it for so long and they don't realize that their land is so valuable for lots of reasons. And so I think just trying to deliver that opportunity to let people see how they could help meet a need, but also have their needs met. It's a beautiful thing.
Cool. What's the challenge of making that bridge right now?
A lot of, I guess, misunderstanding, misinformation that's out there. And so you have to hear people, hear their concerns from all of those angles that they come from. And then you have to be able to kind of paint a larger scale picture of really what it can look like, what it does look like, and what it can look like. So it is a very delicate balance of hearing folks. And sometimes, as I use the word generational in my previous story, it's generational kind of misunderstandings that have to be walked through. And you have to do that very respectfully because these folks are, they're very tied to what they do and the land that they live on and operate from.
Yes. And I would imagine you're almost kind of like really front line of these big projects, right? Like you're going to be the one knocking on doors.
Tip of
And
the spear. Yes.
yes, so you've got to be quite deliberate in how you present information and also willing to be empathetic to their scenarios and kind of bridge those gaps. As your success story with the elderly woman like highlighted, that you probably got a lot of that kind of incoming or initial responses. How
Oh,
in
yeah.
general do you find, like, how does a project go from here's a conception that we've highlighted this area, we feel like this is a place that this project could thrive in, we've identified the shareholders in the area, we're going to hand it over to you, Rick, what's next?
There is a lot of background work that goes into that. So you have to know how to find people. So that was one of my initial, I guess, challenges is what I would say, is how do you find people? And I had some older folks, when I say older, more seasoned veterans that have been doing this for a long time that I was able to partner up with and
Hmm.
ask, how do you locate these people and what's the best methodology in reaching them? And so once all of these conceptions come and they kind of hand it over and say, we need you to go to obtain land now, that's where the real work starts. And you start finding folks, you start reaching out to folks, and you're looking to do things obviously as strategic as possible without being offensive. So there's a lot of groundwork that goes into that.
You had mentioned this next question. I think you've kind of already highlighted it, but what do you think are the biggest bottlenecks in your work right now? Is it technology, technical, financial, or is it actually on the people side?
I would say there's probably a little of all of those things.
Uh-huh.
We're advancing in technology, but we're dealing with people. At the end of the day, it's all about people. And so some of the bottlenecks in our particular industry really start to become evident around the nitty-gritty of like lease agreements. And when you get into legalities, so a lot of attorneys, they tend to take sometimes an inordinate amount of time to work through some details that may or may not be necessary, but those can bottleneck some projects. And honestly, I wouldn't consider myself all that long into this industry. I'm fairly young into it. And so for me, it seems like it's forever. But some of these veterans that have been around much longer than I have, they say this is par for the course.
Uh-huh. So where do you think the biggest opportunity for innovation is in your industry right now?
I'll sum it up and to say creative communication. I believe you have to be creative.
And so that's from working with a company who's got an idea for a project in an area and then being able to deliver creative communication to the shareholders or to the people there in order
Hmm.
to to basically share a vision of a better future, right? Which is
Absolutely.
both a win-win for like the company who's bringing it, the shareholders who can profit off that, and also then the energy that's,
Yes.
for the larger context. So you're this story weaver in many ways.
Yes, yes. That's why I believe that it's kind of one of my niches, is because that's something I've done for a very long time in many different areas of my career. So this has been kind of interesting to work with different people in this way, but it's been great.
Do you think what would be a way to basically deliver more creative stories or communication and be more effective in that?
Honestly, I think it really comes down to being able to build a relationship that will necessitate or allow that communication to flow freely. So it has to come out of a relationship. So I believe that's where some of the greatest success with people like myself that do this particular job with land and acquisition is knowing how to build relationship, because all parties need to feel that win at the end of the day. So you have to be able to build that relationship for that to be sustainable, for that to happen time and time again. It's not just about pushing a product, convincing someone of a vision. There has to be something to build off of. And that foundation, in my opinion, has to be relationship. And then that's where I believe communication become very free and creative.
Yeah, because I would imagine these are long-term relationships, right? Like anyone who's coming into the project
Yes,
is really it's a marriage, right? As you mentioned earlier, you wanting to pass it from
yes.
generation to generation, so the clarity around that, and then the handing off of who's the point of communication for in between shareholders. So do you think that's what's working really well in your business and with Cathedral, like you guys are able to do that, or is there still, as you mentioned earlier, kind of creative communication? There's room for growth there.
There's always room for growth. That is to be at the forefront, I believe, of every layer of industry growth. But yes, that is something I believe that we do well, specifically with Cathedral. But I've also encountered many other land agencies that do it well also. You have to know how to build relationship, and you do have to be a weaver of vision and story and all of those things. So I believe that's part of what the industry allows us to do, is kind of be a storyteller and to build those relationships for that to be built on.
Perfect. Then on the flip side of that, what do you think the biggest challenge right now that's limiting that potential?
Well, the biggest challenge is, I think, the size of the demand. It's very large. And so I think there are some people that are just kind of thinking these things should go away. We don't need to look at this. We don't want to
Right.
see this. But there's so much demand that I think that we have to open up, our minds to how do we accommodate all of these things. So it does take creativity for that to happen. So it is a challenge, because some people are so used to, we're all creatures of habit. I mean, I can speak for myself, but I
Hmm.
know most of us as humans, we get used to certain things. And so that is no different when it comes to folks that own lots of land. They have certain propensities and desires. And so to be able to kind of open the box and see a bigger picture, that's a real challenge sometimes.
Yeah, I would imagine getting a little bit like you're kind of peeling back the cover of the industry for me so I can take a little bit of a deep dive for me and my audience. And so I would imagine it's like forward thinking would be like we almost need a larger scale education for the everyone, right? Like being like, hey, well, these are our energy demands. This is what the future is going to look like, and kind of removing probably politics or everything from it, and just being like, hey, as humanity, this is on what we're on the cusp for, right? And so there's starting to have a broad base education of like the future that we all want to live in is an energy rich future. And so we're needing to now strategize and open up all these different ways and maybe overcoming some of the challenges of like dirty energy from the past, and
Right.
really opening people up to being like, hey, we respect and love your land, as much as you do. And that's the way we want to take care of it. And so I would imagine, yeah, if we could somehow expand into a larger education process, you might
Yeah.
you would still need to be creative, but you might not have as many objections if we were starting to do a good job of preparing future people for the right type of future.
I believe that's, yeah, 100% true. Yeah. Well said.
Yeah. And that probably starts at all levels of like education, even, high school, university, preparing people for
Right.
like leading, I think we're in the renewable energy sector, talking to different people. It's really about casting a vision for a better future, one that can
Hmm.
sustain all of our growth and our needs and our wants within that, but do it in the right way. So it's like there's a lot of education and willingness to like, move past old paradigms to create new ones. So I commend you for doing all that work on the front lines because I could imagine maybe I'm not the only one thinking of like walking up to like a Yellowstone ranch kind of scenario and
Yes.
having a shotgun brought out and being like, what are you doing here?
Yeah. That's not all too far from the truth at times.
I believe it. So as you think about your goals over the next like 6 to 12 months, what's your big focus?
Right now, I'm in the middle of a particular project that we're looking to get site control. And for us, site control kind of consists of a percentage of land that allows us to show basically all levels of the industry that we can move forward. And by doing so, then it's kind of we can get closer to actual construction and kind of that flipping of the switch to now we're generating. So site control is kind of that's on my immediate horizon the next 3 6 months for this particular project. And that typically means within a sector of land, we'll call 50,000 acres, typically kind of what we're looking for, give or take, 10,000 here and there. We need to have a certain amount of land for a certain level of projects. So to get site control, we typically need about 30-40% of that land acquired. So we're getting very close to that happening. And then we can move to what we call late stage. And we can kind of hand this off to another section of our departments that work towards the full construction and implementation of the project.
When you get to that 30 to 40% range, do you find that the rest of the stakeholders, that's kind of a tipping point that, yes, you feel comfortable moving forward with the project from like probably more of a financial and construction side, but also the
Absolutely.
stakeholders must be like, okay, this is happening, right? There's a reality of
Yes.
like, there's forward movement here. So that's kind of your tipping
Yes.
point.
Absolutely. And you use the word financial, and that's really what it boils down to. Folks on both sides of the equation, stakeholders, landowners, engineers, company, decision makers, they need to see that this can move forward. So by obtaining a certain level of land, that does tip the scales towards that forward momentum for everybody.
That's great. So if you had unlimited resources or support, what's the one thing that you would change to accelerate this process?
I think what I would try to do, and I feel limited in my explanation of this, so I'm going to this is raw for me.
Yep.
I think probably coming out of the gate with our best offerings and not having to negotiate as much with folks with what we're really able to do to come to not the bottom line, but as close as possible to say, we'd like to partner. Here's really how you can benefit. This is really what we can do for you. Instead of kind of coming out and tiptoeing into projects, coming with a little bit more to offer is what I think would be really helpful.
So that would just allow people to be able to make a final decision faster, right? That they're like, okay, uh, oh, as I mentioned this, I kind of
Potentially.
potentially I think about like, okay, we're still back to like this is a relationship business, so it's like, how do you
Yes.
get that trust? And trust can be a two-way street, right? If you're bringing the
Yes.
close to the best offer right up front and letting people know, hey, like this is a good offer. This is what's happening right now on the terrain and in the industry. We can
Right.
negotiate a little around this, but like this is a good deal to start working from to get really people to buy in. If you were able to come at that, like if you were able to do Rick's accelerated process, right? And you get the green light from the people that you work for, do you think how fast do you think things would accelerate by?
I would say probably 20% for sure.
Yeah.
I don't think it's night and day difference, but those little movements do make an impact. That can sometimes that can stall a project if you take too many months to obtain certain things. It can stall things out. things change quickly. So to me, that those moments, or use the word maybe even months, are precious. So coming out of the gate with our best, I think that gains trust for definitely for certain people. And sometimes that's all you need is certain people to kind of be your anchor and your foundation, and then you build off of that. But coming out strong to me is, I just feel like it puts us in a better light, and it shows somewhat vulnerability to say, here's really where we're at. We'd love to partner with you. Putting our best foot forward early, I think, saves time and probably pushes the needle on getting projects done quicker.
Yeah, I think I would tend to agree with you. And I'd also say, like within the industry there, how many of these? Because you had mentioned earlier, okay, there's a substantial amount of research that goes into like picking a site, picking a project, doing all of
Hmm.
that. And so when you start these conversations move forward, what's the percentage of projects that actually go all the way to getting done versus the ones that, the factors, or you just can't get the buy-in from the community or the other people involved? Like how many get cut? Do you know that? Even though I know you've only been kind of doing this for a few years, but talking to like senior people, like how many projects actually go all the way?
Not as many as I would have thought. I don't have a good percentage to share with you, but from my vantage point, we have had more projects. We'll use the word shelved. Like
Yeah.
you take the project, you put it up on the shelf. You have a little bit of momentum maybe with it, but it's not the right time. Maybe the project didn't price out appropriately at the time. We have number crunchers, analysts, developers, engineers that are all a part of this. And so when something doesn't price out, you can have a lot of factors going your way. But if that bottom line doesn't really work, it's a business deal at the end of the day. And so they might have to put it on the shelf and wait until a later date when it can price a little bit better. So I've seen a lot of projects be shelved. I've seen a lot of projects actually be cut for lots of reasons. One of which, we can't obtain enough land. We're kind of blocked in certain areas for various reasons. So you just kind of have to walk away. But there are a percentage, and in my mind, I feel like it's low, but there are a percentage that do. They hit, they pop, they move to construction, and they're viable projects that are in working, functioning order today. I'm kind of got a little scope of the state of Texas. That's kind of where my purview is.
Hmm.
But the company that I'm contracted under is NextEra Energy. NextEra Energy is the largest renewable energy company in the world. So they come and get services from Cathedral. So we basically work under the auspice of NextEra. And their success across the country it's large scale. But my little, like, again, slice is
Hmm.
Texas. So what I'm seeing is, I think there could be more, but there is a lot going on across the country, though.
Well, it kind of comes back to how we originally started this, feeling like because of the demand, there needs to be more of these projects. Probably a lot are getting put on the board
There
through
are.
either financial costs or stakeholders not agreeing. It kind of gets dwindled down, and then you get a few over the lines. Do you think where the industry is today and where you see, the success happening and growth, are we going to be able to keep up to the demand that's required at this point? And if we're not, what do you think needs to shift within the industry to actually get there?
Man, that's a Pandora's box type question. My gut reaction is no. I don't think we're going to be able to keep up with the demand. And I'm going to answer that based on kind of deep conviction that's within me from my vantage point of humanity. That as humans, we have a certain nature within us. We have a good nature, but we also have a very selfish nature. We always want more. And so for various reasons, we want to create, we want to expand, and that's beautiful. But I think sometimes our demand is, it's kind of like our eyes are bigger than our stomach. If you've ever heard that
Hmm.
phrase before, when you're at a buffet and you're like, I can't eat all this. How did I get all this? Because we have such an expectation. So I don't know that we'll get there. What it would take to shift is, I think, very, very foundational. When you talk about shifting a paradigm, that's like very, very foundational. What we really need would have to change, what we think we need versus what we want. So
That is
that's
the
a large
paradigm shift.
question. It is. I don't know how to answer that very concisely, but I just that there's Rick's gut level response.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you, Rick. I think we need to change what our expectations, and then we also need to support an industry to grow and mature to meet those expectations, like our needs, without having to like try to fulfill all of our wants because we're just incapable of doing that.
Agreed.
Okay, great. As we move towards the end here, a couple wrap up questions for you. What's one piece of advice you'd give someone who's interested in getting into the renewable energy sector?
Honesty is key. So being an honest, trustworthy individual, that the words that you share can be taken, as quote unquote the gospel or the truth because it comes from an honest, place. That's what I believe would be key for someone that wants to step in. It's not a get rich quick industry. It's a very service based industry. You're looking to serve people and meet needs. And there are rewards and outcomes that are very rewarding. But I think you have to come into it with that honest perspective that you can not only see things through that lens, but you can also help others see things from that lens.
Perfect. Rick, this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate you being on the podcast. So before we wrap up here, maybe you could tell our listeners where they could get more information about you and the work that you do, if you want to give your social media connections or your website.
I'm not a huge social media guru, but if you want to look into the company, Cathedral Land Solutions can be found online. Next Era Energy can be found online. If someone's wanting to kind of, I guess, look deeper into the concerns of energy creation and some of the challenges that are out there, those would be some great places to start. And I would advise people to look that direction first before just listening to kind of the public pundits that have things to say about energy creation without understanding the wider scope of what's happening. I've really enjoyed being here, Krill. I appreciate all the questions and the opportunity to share just from my perspective, and anyone that's heard that, I appreciate you taking time to listen.
Great. And of course, if you want to reach out to Rick, you can find him on LinkedIn too, where there's great conversations happening over there with leaders in the industry. So, Rick, thanks so much for being on the podcast, and we look forward to the next one soon. See you, everybody.
Thanks.